Well, as you can imagine, everyone in the church office has been eagerly awaiting the birth of Pastor Alex's first child. We've been eager to get updates on how he's doing, how his wife Brenna's doing, and he's been happy to oblige. He's excited. And so a few weeks ago when they got one of those 3D images, ultrasound images, he was proudly showing off the picture. I think the 3D images are a little weird, I've got to say. It's a little disconcerting. But it's kind of cool that we have the technology that we have, that we can see the kid before the kid's even born. And so I looked at it, and I'll be darned, that little face looked like Pastor Alex. A lot. So we're all oohing and awing over this little baby face. And Ashley Saunders, God bless her, she pipes up, "Yeah, that's so you don't eat her." What? So this is when I learned that this is apparently a thing. It's somewhere between old wives' tale and actually science. People claim that a baby, especially a firstborn baby, is more likely to look like their father than their mother. Because, so it goes, back in the caveman days, that was how a man would accept that the child was his and care for the child instead of being tempted to eat it. Like, this is a thing. I learned something new that day. I did some research. Studies have been done on this, and some of the studies have said a baby does tend to look more like their father. And again, maybe because in an era before DNA tests, it would lead to greater acceptance by the father that the kid is theirs. But then there are other studies that contradict that and say, no, a baby usually looks like both parents equally. But it's interesting to try to figure out, who a kid looks like, right? To look at someone and their parents and see the image of each in their child. And it's interesting how sometimes that changes as we age, too. When I was a kid, people told me all the time that I looked just like my mom. And it seems like as I'm getting older, I've taken on more characteristics from my dad's side of the family. We look for those images in ourselves and in someone else. We like to see our own image other places and in other people, and we like to be able to put our image and leave our mark on things, whether it's our children or graffiti on trains or art in the Sistine Chapel or cave paintings back in the day or computer-generated avatars. We like to imbue the things we create with our own image. And perhaps that's part of how we seek to kind of take control of our surroundings, to place our mark in the world, to leave a legacy. And it's the way we claim things as our own, by putting our mark, our image on it, and apparently also so we don't eat it. So I suppose that this idea of having control is a big reason why we have the practice of putting emperors and kings and presidents on our currency. There's a lot of power in having on whose face is on our money. If you think that whose face is on our money doesn't have anything to do with who has power and control, I direct your attention to the still ongoing debate about whether Harriet Tubman should replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. People have feelings about this, and it reveals something of what we think about who should have that power and control on our money. So Caesar, in Jesus' time, had done the same. He had stamped his face on the denarius coin. So every time goods and services were exchanged, it was like Caesar was there saying, this is mine. And every time the emperor collected taxes, Caesar was there proclaiming, this is mine too. And religious people hated this. They hated these images on coins. Many believed that just having a human face on coins was a form of idolatry. And indeed, it's easy to see how quickly you can go from honoring to worshiping money in particular, and those whose face the coin holds, and especially because the inscription on the coin in question proclaimed Caesar to be divine. It was written on the coin with his face. So using these coins to people of faith, it felt like worshiping a false god. And so a lot of them refused to use Roman currency. And then, of course, that currency was a constant reminder of the Roman occupation. They'd have to pay a head tax every year, and that tax money went to pay the army who was oppressing them. They had to pay for their own oppression. And so a lot of political things went into this, obviously, about the coins. It raised a lot of issues. And that is why the political enemies of Jesus found this to be the perfect subject to raise with him, because it was complicated. And they were going to try to trap him in this. The word that's used there for entrapping Jesus, that Greek word means to catch by trapping or fishing. So they were trying to get a hook in him and get him. Because if he said, yes, you should pay your taxes, well, then all these faithful people who are following him are going to say, what? Like, that's worshiping another god. What are you doing? And if he says you shouldn't pay your taxes, then the government could come down on him and have him arrested. And so either way, they think they've got Jesus hooked. But Jesus sees his hypocrisy, we read, their hypocrisy, and he says to them, bring me a denarius. Now that's interesting. He didn't have one in his pocket, right? They're in the temple. He didn't have this currency on him. But they did, the religious leaders who were asking him this question. He said, bring me a denarius, and they produce it right away. And in that, Jesus has very slyly caused them to reveal their own authority, or losing words today. Complicity, that's not quite the word, but yeah. Allegiance. Allegiance was the word that I lost. He got them to show their allegiance. They carry these coins. They use these coins. And they're the ones trying to trap him. Well, they use these coins. And so simply by that action, it's like Jesus is saying, well, you can't use this money and then try to get out of paying taxes, right? You're part of the system. You can't claim that you're not. And so he says, fine, give to the emperor what is made in the emperor's image, these coins. Give God what is made in God's image, yourselves. Give to God what is God's. That's ourselves, that's everything, right? We see that in the parable that comes right before this story. This parable of the vineyard with the tenants that act like they own the place. They want to own the place. The son comes, they say, this is the heir. If we kill him, we could take ownership of this. And Jesus makes it clear, no, they're only the tenants. And in this allegory, we see that Jesus is pointing towards those tenants as these religious leaders that are not being good stewards of the people and the religious practices. And they realize it too. They see that he was talking about them. It's easy to point to a specific time and place, right, and say, oh, yeah, those leaders were bad people. But this is a much bigger story. This is a much more universal parable, because we know that God has indeed made us stewards of a vineyard called earth. And like these tenants, so often we too have turned to violence. So often we too have turned to power and control through the money we wield. Give the emperor what is made in the emperor's image. give God what is made in God's image. What is more extraordinary than the face of an emperor on a coin? Well, the fact that each of us bears a mark on our life. What could be more astonishing than an entire currency containing the image of the emperor who made it? The truth that each one of our communities is a treasury minted in the image of our Creator. From Jesus' point of view, it's not a big deal at all to pay Caesar's tribute with the money in our pockets, once we remember that we pay tribute of thanksgiving and service to God each and every day with our lives, with everything. The currency of an empire is copper, stone, sword. And these are powerful if you want to build a city or an army or pave a road. The currency of the Creator are things like flesh and blood, intellect and language, creativity and morality and kindness. Imagine what those things could build. Maybe the religious leaders have simply forgotten that they are made in God's image because they've gotten so caught up of questions of who is really in charge. Maybe we have too. Maybe we've stopped asking who is really in charge and just fall into line, feeling like some days we're just a cog in a machine or pawns of whatever cruel empire we have. And we forget that we have been made in God's image. When I was on internship, I had worked with a pastor who at the end of every confirmation class, every single one, and we met weekly, they met 3 years, just like we do, every class, he would look at the kids and as they were right before they left, and he would say, remember that you are God's child, chosen, holy, and precious. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. What a powerful word of identity and remembrance for middle schoolers who are trying to figure this all out, right? And who are being bombarded with messages about who they are and who they should be. And we are too. It doesn't hurt for us to be reminded of just how chosen, holy, and precious each one of us are. And remembering that doesn't just affect us, right? It means we can look at others and see that they are made in God's image too. And that together we can all participate in a world that is going to try to convince us otherwise, try to convince us that some people are beyond God's love and redemption. We, in God's image, are designed to reflect out God's qualities of love and care and mercy. There was an article in a magazine where they asked 6 leaders in different fields to answer the question, what's the point? Like that was it. That was the question. What's the point? And so they had philosophers and poets and a psychoanalyst, and they all had interesting, very articulate, thoughtful answers. There was one person who had a simple 4-word response to that question. And this was the biographer and obituarist, Anne Rowe. So her job was to write biographies and obituaries. So she was the one person in that list of experts and thoughtful people whose career was completely just looking at the sum total of people's life stories and finding within them some pattern and meaning. And so the way that she responded to this question, what is the point? She wrote very simply, the point is love. Love. We are made in God's image, in love and for love. And love is ultimately what we and no one else are able to render to God and creation. Pastor Philip Martin writes, even when our godlike image is so tarnished and broken, so demolished by sin and our self-serving behavior that we are not sure we're even able to love, not able to recognize the healing powers of our speech, our intellect, our creativity, much less lift it to God, then we remember that God has become one of us in that human image. And because of that, we can see that even in death, even in utter suffering, we still bear the image of the divine. Even as we breathe our last and the story of our life comes to a close, there is still opportunity to reflect God's glory. Caesar's army and tax may be powerful, but imagine all the force of justice and righteousness if our redeemed lives were offered in tribute each and every day to the Lord of heaven and earth, because the point is love. Imagine the love of Christ unleashed in each of our forgiven lives, knowing our value, seeing value in each human being. What would that economy look like? God has loved us into bearing God's image, and now we bear that image back to God. What a revolution that is. Because we do, it turns out, look like our Father, our Heavenly Father. And so remember that you are God's child, chosen, holy, and precious. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Amen.